Hi, good evening. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Pam King-Petrot, and I'm the head of the Harvard Kennedy School Alumni Network in New York. Thank you so much again for joining us, and thank you actually, Baruch, for hosting us. Hopefully you'll have a really great evening. We've got a great panel discussion planned for you. I'd like to now introduce Carolyn Kennedy, who is the chair of the Institute of Politics.
Welcome to our panelists. It's wonderful to have the IOP in New York, and for all of you to get a chance to reconnect with the Kennedy School, the IOP, and each other. So I'm thrilled to welcome them, and our new director, Trey Grayson, who I hope you'll all get a chance to get to know. And we're thrilled to have you, and I wish I could hear from every single one of you about the work that you're all doing, but I know we'll have an interesting conversation tonight. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Thank you, Caroline, for that introduction, and thanks for having us in your city. And thanks to all of you, almost all of whom are probably New Yorkers. I'm sure some of you came from elsewhere because you were just dying to come listen to these experts talk. But we're really excited to be here. I want to thank Pam, Baruch College, the Harvard Kennedy School Office of Alumni Relations, especially Paige Ennis and Betsy Vianney, and two of my colleagues, Kathy McLaughlin and Christian Flynn. Without their hard work, tonight's event wouldn't be possible. So thank you to all of them, and how about a round of applause for them? I thought what I'd do is I would quickly introduce our panelists, although the reality is they don't really need an introduction. So let's see, where is everybody? My notes don't have them in the right order. So in the middle here with no table, we were giving him a hard time. Matt Dowd has helped shape strategies and campaigns for CEOs, political candidates, corporations, foundations, and governments, and served as chief campaign strategist for President George W. Bush, and he's currently an analyst for, I heard it hiss in the audience. It's okay, it's bipartisan here. He's an analyst for ABC News and Bloomberg and a columnist for the National Journal. To the far left, in the little chair, John Heilemann, national political correspondent and columnist for New York Magazine and an award-winning journalist. Those who haven't read Game Change are really missing out. He and Mark Halperin wrote that book about the last presidential campaign, and it's one of the best political books and one of the best chronicles of a campaign I've ever read. So we're glad to have John here. He's also a 1990 graduate of the Harvard Kennedy School with an MPA, so he's one of our proud alums. Many of the HKS alums in the audience know Elaine Kamarck, who's a lecturer in public policy. But before that, she had a distinguished career and continues to have a distinguished career in politics and government. She's one of the founders of the new Democratic movement in the 1980s and 90s that helped to elect Bill Clinton president, served in the Clinton administration, and is currently and still is an at-large member of the Democratic National Committee. And Lois Romano is a senior writer for Newsweek and the Daily Beast, based in Washington, was a longtime political writer and columnist for the Washington Post, covering presidential campaigns and Washington power brokers. Also was an IOP fellow in the fall of 2008, leading a study group entitled A Transformative Election. And is still a big part of our family. The last couple of summers she's hosted the Summer in Washington kickoff for our summer, the students spending the summer in Washington, D.C. So we're glad to have all the panelists with us. And I thought what we'd do is begin. John's actually, it's not a secret, John and Mark are working on, I don't know if it's really a sequel, Game Change 2. And by the way, Game Change 1 is coming to a theater near you. Are you in the movie? Did they cast you?
I'm
Brad Pitt?
I'm actually in the movie. I'm actually playing John McCain. They went for typecasting.
Typecasting, yes. Set the stage. What would you be? You're probably not writing literally right now in the book, but where are we right now in your book in this presidential race, as we're a little bit more than a year from the general election?
Okay. So first of all, thanks for having me. To everybody here, my alma mater, and we're happy to see all you people come out to listen to these people who all know a lot, and I who try to learn from them. Mostly. I want to actually start, before I do what Trey just asked me to do, I want to do something I like to do when I'm in any audience. I like to try to get a sense of who is here. So I'm going to ask you to do something that might be a little bit uncomfortable. I'm going to ask you to put up your hands and tell me who you voted for in the 2008 elections. If you feel uncomfortable voting in front of your seatmates and colleagues, just close your eyes. They'll feel better about that. So in 2008, how many people in the room voted for Barack Obama?
Wow.
Okay. And how many people in the audience voted for John McCain? Okay. So
this is a representative Harvard audience.
I was just saying, congratulations by the standards of both Manhattan and Harvard.
Put up our hands.
By the standards of both Manhattan and Harvard, this is a very ideologically diverse audience. For those of you who voted for John McCain, I know the security guy. He's in the back. If you need help out at the end of the night, we can work that out. So I'll say three things, I guess, just to try to kind of frame up, where we are right now, and they're kind of, we're a year kind of in at this point, although this race started pretty late. I think when the history is written by Mark and I and by a lot of other people, the first thing that people will note about this race is how extraordinarily strange it is that the Republican field is as weak as it is. And the story of why it is that a lot of people that many people in politics thought might run in this race, why those people didn't enter the race will be kind of an interesting story to tell. You have a president who is extraordinarily vulnerable right now. I did not ask how many of you plan to support the president next time, because I think that number might be smaller. I don't know. But a president with a 41% approval rating, 75% of the people in the country think the country's on the wrong track. This is a guy who is ripe for the taking. And yet, many prominent Republican governors, senators, people who presumably want to run for president, have expressed interest either privately or publicly in the past in trying to take a shot at the White House, declined to run. And that has led to a couple of other things that are important in terms of where we are now. And that is, first of all, that we have a situation in which we have, I think, the weakest Republican frontrunner that we've seen in probably our lifetimes. A guy who has improved markedly as a candidate, Mitt Romney, from when he ran in 2008, but who has demonstrably over the course of the last year shown that he has a hard time, even despite the fact that 100% of the Republican Party knows who he is. He can't really get more than 25% of the national electorate to support him in any public opinion poll. That's a pretty odd situation, and Matthew will remember what the situation was when George W. Bush ran against John McCain, and George W. Bush was in the mid to high 60s at this point, and was 40 points ahead of John McCain, his nearest rival, back in 2000. We now have, as I say, a Republican frontrunner who's finding it hard to break through 25%, and we have seen this kind of extraordinary churn over the course of the year as a variety of potential not Romneys have emerged, found favor momentarily, risen rapidly in the polls, and then fallen back down to earth. Some of them are actual politicians, people like Michelle Bachmann. Others are people like Donald Trump. I don't know what he actually qualifies as.
New Yorker, right?
Herman Cain, a great New Yorker, certainly, pride of the city.
Yeah.
And although he does eat his pizza with a fork, which basically disqualifies him from any sense of being a real New Yorker. And now Herman Cain, a businessman, very much on the rise, leading in a lot of national polls right now. But many people, I think, in the political class assume that he will come crashing back down to earth soon also. And I think it speaks to the last thing I'll say is that I think it does speak to the deeper dynamic. And again, much smarter people will have smart things to say about this than me. But you do have a Republican Party right now that is demonstrably different from any Republican Party that we all know from our past. This is a party where the Tea Party, this populist, combination of a populist and evangelical wing of the party, has infused it with enormous energy, drove a lot of the electoral outcomes in 2010, has given the party a huge enthusiasm gap over the Democratic Party, and that should be a big benefit to them when it comes time to vote next fall. But they are not like the establishment wing of the Republican Party, the mainstream wing that has dominated nominating contests always in presidential contests in the past. And the question, I think the big question, and we're watching it now play out, is which Republican Party is it today that's going to control this nominating process? If it is still enough of that old Republican Party still exists, you would think that Mitt Romney should ultimately prevail. But I think a lot of what we've seen with this, although no one has emerged as the dominant force for that wing of the party over the course of this last year. The fact that there is clearly this palpable yearning for someone who's not Mitt Romney, who's more conservative, who's more aligned with the Tea Party, with the populist values, with evangelical values, that tells you something about the fact that the party has changed substantially. And it may still be that this is an unusual election and that for all of his nominal strengths, that someone ultimately coalesces that support from that side of the party and is able to find a way to beat Mitt Romney as we go forward.
Great. I think that's a great table setting, a great beginning to Game Change. So I'm going to go to Lois next. You've been on the campaign trail quite a bit, covering candidates. Maybe you had the article attached to one of the more famous covers of your magazine. She did not take the picture of Michelle Bachmann.
Michelle Bachmann. I didn't pick the picture or
She didn't pick the picture or take the picture, but wrote a really good article that was supportive, that was referenced on the front page of the magazine. Let's explore the second point about the candidates and the race and the inability for Romney to kind of coalesce and the rise and the fall of a lot of these personalities. What are you seeing and what are you hearing from your colleagues at the Daily Beast, Newsweek, who are out on the road on the daily basis?
I think a couple of things. I want to just pick up on one thing that John said first, and that is the decision of some of these candidates not to run. And I think that's an extremely interesting question. And the reason I think that some of them decided not to run is that I think they're not ready to write off Barack Obama. This is going to be an $8 billion campaign. And my opinion is it's not going to be about that many issues. It's going to be probably one of the most negative campaigns in American history. And Obama's going to have a lot of money, and I think we're going to see enormous, enormous character assassinations. And so if you look down the list of the people who chose not to run, Haley Barbour, he just said, it's a 12-year commitment. I don't want to do it. It's going to destroy my family. Mitch Daniels, he had a problem with a wife who left and then came back. Chris Christie, you know, he needs to get his house and his belt in order. I mean, you know, he's got some work to do. I mean, there are just a lot of people that looked at the race, and raising money, it's all about the money. It's so hard right now, and I think these people just didn't want to take it on.
Yeah, they all cited personal reasons, but the number of them who opted out for personal reasons struck me as being, there's something else there. And
it was a little bit, you know, I think the money is, it's to the point now where you almost have to be a celebrity to win, to get in the game, or create yourself as a celebrity, which is what Obama did and which is what Herman Cain is doing now. So which brings me to your question. I think what we're seeing and what we've seen, you know, since this campaign started, which was late, is a really anybody but Romney movement going on. And they've just really kind of picked through people. And the first one out of the gate was Michelle Bachmann. But those of us who watched this never really thought that that was going to hold. She is charming, attractive, very passionate about her issues. But the depth of the issues kind of stops. It's the breadth. I don't say the depth, it's the breadth. You know, she doesn't have any overseas experience. And so they were really looking for somebody else when Rick Perry came along. And then it was like this massive movement over there. You know, it's like the kid, you know, that gets left at the dance. All of a sudden, everybody runs over, and Michelle Bachmann's standing there by herself. And then Rick Perry, you know, for all his bluster, he just couldn't get through a debate. Now, he did well the other night, and maybe people are going to inch back, but they dropped him pretty quickly, too. Now we're seeing the rise of Herman Cain, which is fascinating, and I think healthy for the party. But I'm not sure where that's going either, because he can't withstand too much pressure on the 999 thing. And last night, he decided that he was, he switched his position on abortion. He said, now it's up to the family. Not a good thing to say in a right-wing primary situation. So he might have become a persona non grata now with the Tea Party. So, you know, all that is to say, I'm not sure what's going to happen now, because, as John said, we have only 25% of the Republican base who cares anything about Romney, and they're just really trying to find somebody in this other, you know, group of people.
Well, let's keep working our way back towards me. Matthew, you've been around some Republican campaigns. You're now observing this one. Obviously, it's a different party today than 2000, 2004. What's your take on all this as somebody who's been through the battles, been through primaries, been through general elections, and now watching this from a distance.
Well, I've been through both sides of it. So I did 20-some-odd years on the Democratic side of it, and then through the Bush years. To me, there's I'd take a step back on it. What's going on, I think, and it's been going on now for 8 to 10 years, I think, is it's a societal situation that's happening, which is at every level, a huge chunk of Americans have lost faith and trust in almost every single institution in this country. Corporate institutions, governmental institutions, and political institutions.
And media.
And media institutions, all along the way. And even in many sports institutions that used to be sort of a building team spirit, they've all had various accusations and all that. And so you have a country that's incredibly anxious, has gone through a tremendous anxiety over national security, and now is in complete anxiety over the economy, which is, I think, where it's going through as fundamental change as we went through when we went from an agriculture-based society to a manufacturer-based society, where it's going through as great change as that. And so then you have the rise of various movements. And there's obviously the movement that's going on Wall Street now is another movement that it's rising up because they don't believe, they don't trust and have faith in institutions to accomplish it. You saw after Katrina, various people say, I'm not going to deal with FEMA, they don't know what they're doing, I'm going to do it myself. They get on Craigslist. And you have a Republican Party now, where the Tea Party is, that many parts of it have lost faith in their ability to do what needs to be done. And so to me, is most of the candidates, and I believe the candidates when they say they're not running because of personal reasons, which is another commentary on society today, the ability for a good candidate that may have had something, may have got drunk in college and drove off the side of the road, and do they want to reassess that then, or they may had trouble in some relationship or something. And so I believe them, do they want to go through this gauntlet to get to the end of the gauntlet, which then says, what power do I really have to exact change? Getting elected, I mean, obviously it's great to get on Air Force One and all of those sorts of things, and stop traffic and you get to places in a hurry and all of those sort of things. But your ability to exert influence over society is dramatically different today than it used to be. The ability to pull the levers and the ability for the country to be led in a way because of our media institutions that we have that tell people you need to hate that person, you need to hate that person, you need to hate that person, has caused this. The Republican Party, the beginning of the inability of the Republican Party to organize itself around a candidate has been going on for a while. And I think that's another example. If Mitch Daniels or somebody else thought the Republican Party could organize itself around and say, we're going to pick the right guy and you're the right guy and we're going to put you through this process and you're going to be fine, I think you would have different candidates in this race. They don't believe, most of the people in the Republican Party at the leadership level don't believe the Republican Party has the ability anymore to do that. And so, and that started, I think, I saw it in 2000 or 99, 2000. Keep in mind, people forget this. Bush raised $100 million in 2000, which was astronomical, record-setting numbers. Bush was ahead by 40 points. Bush had the endorsement of every single Republican elected official. Bush had all the organization. Bush had all of the stuff going for it. Bush could have easily lost the Republican nomination in 2000. He lost New Hampshire by 18 points. Even after he won South Carolina in a very bitter fight, he lost Michigan. And only, I think, to a large degree, but for a lot of work that was prepped and the stuff that was done that was previously done for Bush and all of the sort of activities and mistakes by John McCain, you could have every bit of that going for it, and Bush could have lost the nomination to an insurgent campaign that he was outspending by 10 or 12 to 1 and had no elected officials, was no part of really the Republican Party, and he almost lost to that guy. And so that process has started, and now we're in a process where basically that you have freewheeling people. You have people that are looking for a leader but don't want to be led. Well, this is an interesting process. The Tea Party has I'm looking for a leader but don't tell me what to do. And so, as was said before, so you have this free-floating, I'm not going to go with the boring, white, inauthentic guy, and I'm looking for something else. I'm looking for passion. I'm looking for something that's going to make change in Washington. And I think Mitt Romney has a secret. And he's not telling us, but I know what he's going to do when he's nominated. This is a huge part of the conservative and the Tea Party independent, and they think he's going to do one of these deals where he gets a nomination and then he's just going to run right over and cut all kinds of deals, and he's going to do exactly the same thing.
Be a rhino.
And be a rhino. There's some evidence that he's probably going to do that.
Perhaps
there is some
perhaps he's done that in the past.
And so, as it says, you have this free-floating anti-Romney that's looking for somebody. And Romney's problem is not issue-based; it's authenticity-based. People don't. There's a huge part of the party that does not think he's authentic in his values, that thinks he'll shift depending on what's going on. And so, you're right. It moved to Michelle Bachmann very, very briefly. And then they wanted Rick Perry. There was all these misgivings about Rick Perry because he was coming from Texas. And are we going to have another Texas governor that walks around like he's sheriff in town? Are we going to do this again? But he didn't perform well. And so the great thing about this, and I know we'll get to this, is how much debates matter. Rick Perry, Rose was in first place, and the only thing happened between him being in first place and him being in fourth place were 4 debates. It's not like he did anything.
Well, even Michelle Bachmann's initial rise was that performance at the New Hampshire debate in June.
Yeah, and what she did with Tim Pawlenty in Iowa, she wins the straw vote. And then now you have Herman Cain. And Herman Cain, 2%, he was at 2% in the polls 2 months ago, has gone through a series of debate. All of this stuff falls. He comes across, there's nobody out there saying, boy, I want this 999 plan. I've looked at it. It's great, and this is what America needs. They like Herman Cain because he's an outsider, he's likable, they think he's like a happy warrior. You get energy from him at a time the party and I think the country, many of their leaders feel beleaguered. I think if you watch President Obama, even if you're objective about it, you feel like he is somewhat beaten down. The forces of the world are upon him. I don't know what I can do. You get this sense, I don't know what I can do. Boy, the Republicans are doing all kinds of stuff, and I have dings and dents to prove it. The country wants energy. The country wants somebody to say, listen, I know where we're going. This is how we're going to get there. Let's go and quit complaining. And that's what the country wants, I think, to a large degree. That's Herman Cain right now. I think Herman Cain will ultimately falter and get ready for the next free-floating thing, which will be Newt Gingrich.
Newt Gingrich, yes.
And that's who, and it could settle on Newt Gingrich. And Newt Gingrich, I know we all have this thing and remember him from 16 years ago, and obviously he's a Tiffany's fan and all the stuff. That's an aside. He has an expense account at Tiffany's or whatever. That was reported. Or whatever he has.
That's good for the New York economy.
And so it could move to him. But I think we're going to be in a situation, Barack Obama's numbers aren't going to get any better. And he's going to be, the only thing he can do to try to win is launch a complete negative campaign, which I think it will then encourage a third party to run, because you're going to have 2 unelectable candidates running. Whoever the Republican nominates will look unelectable. Barack Obama already is unelectable. And so the country's going to be like, is this what we're going to choose from? And I think somebody is going to emerge. I'm not saying it's your fair mayor. I do some TV for Bloomberg, so I'm not doing that as a plug.
What time do you air? What time do you show?
So I think I think there's no straight path in the next 12 months. We don't know. We can all sit here and say something, and then we got together a month from now, and we would be like, wow, isn't that neat that X happened or Y happened? There's no straight path. And that's what I think we're dealing with as a society, because we don't have a concrete ability to sit in any of our places that we always thought we could sit and count on them.
Okay. Well, we'll go to Elaine. Just more general comments about your take on it so far, and feel free to. We can come back to you. You can put your Democratic hat on if you want to, or you can do it right now.
Well, I'll do a little of that. I mean, let's talk about Obama, because we've really been concentrating on the Republicans. I think he has 2 big advantages in this race. One is that there hasn't been the personality turn against him. Now, some of us who've been in a lot of campaigns, and the worst for me was in the Al Gore campaign in 2000. You saw Al Gore suddenly turn into an exaggerator and a liar. Okay? It was a series of stupid little things that the Bush campaign did really well, and they created a narrative that went to his personality. And you can feel that in a campaign. You're in trouble when that happens. That has, in spite of all of Obama's problems, people still like him. They respect him. there's nothing that's sort of irritating people about him these days. They love Michelle. They're a good couple. They're solid. And that, I think, is worth an awful lot, even in the face of all of the problems that he has. I think he's made, there were things that I would have done differently than he did, but I think he still has a solid base in the American public in terms of likability. And I go back to one of my very earliest campaigns, which was the Mondale 1984 campaign, when our pollster, Phil Hart, stood up in front of us and said, well, you know, the public is with us. This was in the summer of 1984. The public is with Mondale on every single issue. And we're all sitting there going, so why are we losing? Okay, so the
I had that thought in my Senate primary.
Yeah. so that sense of likability, that sense that the person is solid, that the person is good, I think really does count for a lot. So that's kind of on the fuzzy side. Let me go to a more analytical side. Barack Obama's margins in 2008 came from young people, from the millennial generation. In 2008, they constituted 17% of the total electorate. And among that 17%, he had big wins, I mean, over 60%. And then in the other age groups, he was closer. I mean, he won some, he split elder people, et cetera. That generation in 2012 increases to 24% of the electorate. This is the biggest generation in American history. I see some of that generation in here. There are students now at the Kennedy School. The biggest generation in American history. Barack Obama's numbers are holding up quite well in that age group. And so you can expect them to turn out, you can expect them to vote for Barack Obama. So the question then becomes, in the 76% who are not of that generation, what happens? Where do they go? Do they desert him in sufficient numbers, right, that it causes him to lose in some places? Second is a shift we're seeing in the demographics of some states, particularly states like North Carolina, states like Virginia, where, you know, in my many years in presidential politics, it was like, Virginia, hello, don't go there, don't even cross the Potomac, it's just ridiculous. North Carolina, basically same thing. Well, there's shifting demographics in these states, which put a slightly different electoral college on the board than we're accustomed to. And so for those two reasons, basically the fact that Obama's but the personal relationship people have with him seems to be holding up, and the fact that we do have some significant shifts in the electorate, I think he's probably in better shape than most people give him credit for at this point in time. Obviously, most Democrats, like myself, are hoping for a complete, total meltdown in the Republican Party, and we are hoping for Ron Paul to be the nominee.
Don't ever underestimate a Paul.
He's kind of the crazy uncle in the attic of the Republican Party. Yeah. He would be a great nominee for any Democrat. But I'll just end with my professor's hat, because I just wrote a book on this topic. The Republican primary in 2012 is going to be different for one pretty significant reason. For the first time ever, they adopted a proportional representation system for the first month of their contests, which is basically March and everything before then. And then after that, they have a winner-take-all contest. Now, in 2008, McCain, even though he had actually a strong challenge from Mike Huckabee, McCain basically wrapped this up. And the reason he wrapped it up early was because even though Huckabee was kind of bumping up against him, he was winning 100% of the delegates. So, you know, you guys in the press saw that, you saw the delegate count, you said, oh yeah, well, Mike Huckabee isn't that interesting, but we're not going to really give you any serious time or attention because, in fact, McCain's walking away with it. This time, the Republican Party will have a real dogfight in March, and under proportional rules, because we Democrats have lived with these things for many years, under proportional rules, it's really hard to win delegates. So a weak Mitt Romney, for instance, could get to the end of March without a clear delegate lead, and you could have an awful lot of people in this race, and you could have a very unsettled race all the way through. Conventional wisdom says that, that unsettled races are bad for a party. Unsettled races sometimes make the eventual nominee stronger. I think that Barack Obama was a much stronger candidate for having the test that Hillary Clinton gave him. And if Mitt Romney can manage to get through this thing, and this will be my final comment, don't underestimate the transformative power in this day and age of nominating conventions. Nominating conventions don't do what they used to do, right? They're not a bunch of guys in smoke-filled rooms with cigars, trading delegates.
Those were the days, weren't they?
For the guys, those were the days.
I'm not going to have a room with girls.
You want to go?
Just if we can have a room and we can decide.
But those days are gone. But the nominating conventions have a totally different role now. They take some rotten, stinky, awful politician that all of you have spent 9 months saying terrible things about, and they get to introduce that person to America as a potential president. Mm-hmm. They are truly transformative. And the people who run these conventions on both sides are very good at taking the media and using the imaging to say, okay, well, this was this schmucky guy over here, and he had all these problems, and guess what? Now he's Abraham Lincoln come back to save us. So if Mitt Romney can make it through all of this stuff, I think that you will, in fact, see a stronger nominee than I think perhaps has been alluded to previously.
Good. There's great overview comments. There's a lot here. What I think we'll do is I'll ask a few questions and we'll open it up to the audience because there's just so much here. Let's go back. You alluded to the calendar and the primary process. Let's get back into that because ultimately this isn't a single-day national primary. It's a series of contests. Granted, we don't know when New Hampshire is going to be.
Well, it's probably going to be.
I think it's going to work.
10th.
Yeah, I think it's going to work.
They know that if they put it on another date, they're done.
Yeah,
they're done.
I mean, I know Bill Gardner. I served with him, and if anybody would be dumb enough to put it on in December, I shouldn't say dumb enough, stubborn enough. That's a better word. Might be him, but I don't think he'll do that. That would blow up the New Hampshire primary. So we're looking at an early January with a series of contests. How does this? How does the calendar set up for these candidates? We're only a couple months out.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think the way the calendar sets up, Mitt Romney has to roll the dice on Iowa. The only way this process is shut down as quick as it could be is if Mitt Romney wins Iowa. If Mitt Romney wins Iowa, he wins New Hampshire, the race is basically
kind of like
over.
2004 Democratic primary with John Kerry.
The race is basically over.
Yeah.
And so I think they know that, but if he doesn't roll the dice and win Iowa and Herman Cain wins Iowa, who's there, as of today, there's a poll out that has him ahead in Iowa. I think Michelle Bachmann's time in the sun is done on this. I don't think she really, I know she has an organization and all that. Ron Paul may do well, but I think, and Rick Perry is going to campaign, I think he's going to go all out in making sure that his last stand is going to be bloody Mitt Romney up and try to win Iowa.
And he's $15 million in the
So I think
that
is the question. Mitt Romney's got to make that decision, which I think they're already in the process.
What would you, if you're advising him?
I would say it's worth the money and it's worth the risk to try to win Iowa because if you win Iowa, then you basically don't go through 4 more months of.
Well,
Matt,
and also,
this is why you were excommunicated from your profession. You're just out of your mind. Let me tell you how the media will treat this if this happens. All right, if Mitt Romney decides to play in Iowa,
I wouldn't say I was excommunicated. I voluntarily.
Yeah.
Well, stop taking community. Stop going to the rail.
That's the spin from the guy's.
He had personal reasons.
If Mitt Romney decides to contest Iowa in a serious way, the only narrative before Iowa will be, is Mitt Romney going to win Iowa? That will be the only thing we will discuss. And there will be endless replays of what Mitt Romney did in 2008, which is exactly what you're proposing he should do again this time, which is to roll the dice on trying to win Iowa and then win New Hampshire and shut the entire process down. If he does not then win Iowa, he is done. It is over. There is no second life for him. He is the guy who he is the guy in the media narrative who tried to refight the same fight he fought foolishly in 2008, and having stayed out of it wisely for an entire year, has just blown it again.
Can I disagree? Can I just
jump in here,
with that? Look,
you could take over
Giuliani,
on this
I'll take over this. Giuliani made a terrible mistake, right, by skipping Iowa.
By marrying Judith Nathan?
Yeah, that's right. I don't think Romney needs to win Iowa. I think Romney needs to win place show.
He doesn't.
And go to New Hampshire.
Elaine, I didn't say he needed to win Iowa. I said if he decides to try to win Iowa and then loses Iowa, he'll be over. I don't think he has to win Iowa at all. I think he should stay out of Iowa.
No. I think if he wins places or shows in Iowa, it's fine, because everybody knows that the Iowa Republican caucus is a very, very
you're not actually addressing.
He's going to split it up.
You're not addressing my point.
And he's got lots of money.
But you're not addressing my point.
Well, I think he's disagreeing with Matthew.
He can win place or show in Iowa and do fine. I'm saying if he decides to go all in to try to win Iowa, he must then win Iowa. That's different from any of the things you just said. He can finish third in Iowa and be fine.
I think that the dynamic, I'll disagree with this on one thing. The dynamic, he was never the leading candidate. He was never even close to the leading candidate in 2007 and 2008. He needed breakout. He is now going to, at every single poll that comes out in Iowa, for the next 2 months, he's either going to lead or be in second. He already has a staff there. He already has an operation there. He already has that. He is going to be judged on the results in Iowa anyway, because he can't say, I'm up by 4, a poll goes in, oh, I decided not to spend any money in Iowa. You're up by 4 going into Iowa and you lose. The media is going to judge him on Iowa. They're going to judge him on Iowa. So why not spend $3 million and...
He's already in Iowa. He's
Yeah.
already in Iowa. His wife is practically living there. So I think the narrative that he's trying to create is that he's a reluctant suitor to Iowa, and so, which goes to everybody's point. I mean, last time he was humiliated because he moved into the state and just couldn't break 33%. I mean, he spent a ton of money, and he could not break that ceiling. And so what he needs to do now, and I think he's doing, is playing a lot cooler. He's put an organization on the ground. He's saying he doesn't think he's going to compete there. He's lowering expectations, but he's got his wife, his family, an organization there. And I think what you'll see as we get closer is that he'll start to get more and more involved, and he'll still say, oh, no, I'm not competing here, so whatever he does in Iowa will be great. So if he says, I didn't compete and I came in second or third, and some of the people I talked to said that he was picking up a little bit of the gap that Michelle Bachmann was leaving. Not a lot, but, you know, there's some curiosity about it.
Isn't he also running a different kind of campaign in Iowa this time? I mean, 4 years ago, as I recall, he was positioning himself more as a social conservative, and which he isn't. I mean,
well, he's running on I'm not running campaign.
He's running on the job. Well, now he's more focusing on jobs, and so I think it's a different kind of campaign, and which maybe allows him to not win it and still live to fight another day. It also allows this other strategy.
This is what I think. This is what I think is the fundamental choice. Just to be clear, do you stand up one day and say, "I am going all out to win it"? If you want to play that game, that's the John McCain game. You say, I'm not really running here, and then you come in third, and it's like, that's great. Hey, I got third, and I didn't do very much. That's what they've been doing for the entire year. What I thought Matthew was proposing is they should stand up and say, I am all in Iowa.
No, I don't think they have the capacity to do all the things you're saying they're doing. I just don't think they have the capacity to do wink, wink, wink. We got all this staff here. We got this with the way the media is being covered. Everybody wants to focus on January 3rd. It's going to be a big deal. He's going to be spending money there, and he can't say, well, I'm trying to be in Iowa, but I'm not really in Iowa. I don't know, really, I'm kind of there. He doesn't have that capacity these days. He's either in or he's out. And he can make an announcement or he's not. My only thing is, if I was advising his strategy, I'd say, you ought to be in, because you're going to be judged on it anyway, and it's the only way you can close the process down.
Can I put a little factoid that will probably interest the audience about these Iowa voters, both Democrats and Republicans? They understand their role, just like the New Hampshire voters do. They pay a lot of attention to what's going on. And so even though this is a very conservative electorate in the Republican Party and an extremely liberal electorate in the Democratic Party, they have traditionally also paid attention to electability. One of the little facts that's interesting is the Washington Post does a, I don't know if they still do, does a weekly, summary of news. One of the highest per capita circulations of the Washington Post weekly summary has always been Iowa. Okay? Because they wanted, this is pre-internet days, obviously, where now people can, see it online. But people in Iowa wanted to know the political coverage that you could only get in the Washington Post. So what you find in both these electorates, and I've campaigned in both of them, is that what is happening nationally does in fact affect these voters. And
Absolutely.
so, what?
Absolutely.
And so, if Mitt Romney manages to look strong and he does well against Obama continually in matchups, there's going to be some Iowa conservatives that are going to go like this and go into their caucus and precinct houses that night and vote for Mitt Romney. It's happened to the Democrats. It's happened to my candidates, both in the good way and the bad way. And I think it'll happen again. They are a different kind of electorate, these two electorates, than we often give them credit for.
Well, let's stick with Iowa a little bit. Let's say Romney isn't able to win Iowa. Who's the candidate, based upon what's happened and what you anticipate to happen, is in the best position to get momentum out of Iowa, either winning or a surprising second, something along the lines where you can spin into a win? Is one of the other candidates best positioned to be catapulted out of Iowa? Because there's sort of, in this race we have it's the anybody but Romney primary, and then there's the primary, the Romney versus whoever wins that primary.
I would say Perry, because,
you think Perry still?
Well, he would have to, he would, if he could win Iowa, he would just skip over Romney obviously in New Hampshire, and he'd have to win South Carolina.
Right.
Yeah.
And then then he could do a breakout. But he's got to get that far,
And he went from first to sixth in 30
Right.
days.
He's struggling a little bit.
Yeah.
I also look at the Republican race as sort of, there's two kinds of candidates in it, right? There's candidates that you could potentially see as president, and then there's candidates
Correct.
who are on book tours, okay? and that sort of divides the field. So,
Well, book tour may be the new way to the office.
well,
Yeah.
Well, that's what Herman Cain is on a book tour.
I mean, especially if he's raising $1 million a week.
Well, if
via
he's
the internet.
raising $1 million.
If he's really raising $1 million
yeah, but
a
if
week.
he's not on ballots, that's another
That's a
question.
problem.
Yeah.
That's true.
But so of the potential presidents, right? I would say that a potential surprise in Iowa could be Newt Gingrich. If Newt Gingrich surprises people, jumps up, does well in Iowa, he is certainly credible by virtue of his background, et cetera, as a president of the United States. You could see a breakout from somebody from Gingrich.
Yeah.
But I'm going to address the Herman Cain thing. And I had a conversation with him in New Hampshire. Just a sort of just a conversation. This guy sees himself as president of the United States, and he is sort of like I can be Tony Robbins and get this country going again. I mean, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And don't underestimate what the country's need of that sort of I
beat stage 4 cancer.
Motivation.
This is nothing, right?
And so the other thing is that, and so many people in the media is like, well, he's not really serious. He hasn't raised a lot of money. He's on a book tour. He's not doing this. Well, the guy's gone from 2 to 6 to 8 to 10 to 12. He's leading in Iowa. This is very telling. Mitt Romney has run a great campaign. He's done great debates. He's got a great organization. He's spent a lot of money. He's done all this kind of stuff. He's at 23% and can't get above 23%. Herman Cain has been on a book tour. Sarah Palin can be a celebrity. Whoever mentioned the thing about the celebrity status in this, how important that is. The way we judge whether or not somebody has a serious campaign and can win, the elements that we used to judge on are gone. They're saying somebody has $3 million or $5 million in their bank account, and that's somehow going to be determinative of this, when what's really determinative in this process, which I think is going to carry over for the general election, is what momentum you create, what bond you can have or break with the American public that is unrelated to all of the campaign activities. But that's where we're in. The elements of how we judge the success in a political campaign are just about gone.
Interesting. One other topic I want to explore before we invite the audience to come in, because there's so many ways to go with this. I think I'll just let you all come into the conversation. But Matthew referenced the debates, and I've been struck by, one, how many there have been, how many more there are to be. I mean, I just found out 2 days ago we had Newt Gingrich committed to come to the forum at the Kennedy School on November 15th. Especially with this potential boomlet coming with Gingrich, we were all excited. Well, now there's another debate that just got scheduled on the 15th, so now we have to find another date. They've had a huge impact. Is this a new thing? Is this going to continue throughout the primary and on into the general? They've also been, we've seen the table, Charlie Rose at the table. We've also seen the audience playing a bigger role, at least in, having some interaction. As observers of this, what do you make of this with the debates?
We've had such a proliferation of media outlets, right? And everyone now wants a piece of this. And a lot of this is driven, it's actually supply-driven as much as it's demand-driven. the candidates are not, in fact, demanding more debates. Right. Or at least most of them aren't. But the media outlets
Rick Perry's certainly not.
that are now, we now not only have print media and broadcast media, but we now have all the cable that once, not just broadcast television, we have cable television, now the internet people want in, and Facebook wants in, and Twitter wants in, and Google wants in, and it's the sponsors, who are really driving this stagecoach, and I don't see any stop to it. I think you think back on 2008, on the Democratic side, there were an extraordinarily large number of debates. The candidates hated it, and yet they created many seminal moments. I mean, people forget. And this, goes to back to an earlier topic of Romney's ultimate vulnerability. People forget that Hillary Clinton won 11 debates in 2007, and she was on the way to winning her 12th debate in Drexel in this month, exactly 4 years ago, when in the last 2 minutes of that debate she muffed one question on driver's licenses for illegal immigration, and it sunk a gigantic torpedo-sized hole in the side of her campaign. She never recovered from that last 2 minutes of that debate. That was the moment when she went from 35 points ahead of Barack Obama to, and 10 points ahead of Barack Obama in Iowa at that point, to her ultimate defeat. That was a moment, a signal moment in that race. And we're seeing, with Perry, not just his accumulated performances as having been poor, but his answer, and specifically his answer on illegal immigration at that debate in Florida, which caused him enormous problems. Most of his downfall has not been because the national media thinks he's dumb or is not a good debater. It's because the Tea Party is overwhelmingly drawn, and to speak of our friends at Harvard again, Theda Skocpol in the government department of Harvard is about to come out with an incredible book about the Tea Party that identifies immigration and antipathy to illegal immigration as being the dominant bond across the Tea Party. A great piece of book. They will call it ethnography because they're academics, but in fact reporting in this book. She talked to a huge number of Tea Party members in a way no one else has done, and this issue, immigration, is key. That is what has killed Rick Perry so far. I mean, he lost all of his altitude on the basis of that one answer on that one issue. And so I think there's a great hunger on the part of voters and viewers. The ratings for these things have been high. They were high in 2008. They're high again now. People want to see them. People want to sponsor them. The candidates, whether they like it or not, are going to get sucked into them, and they're going to continue to be important.
Any other thoughts?
The only other thing that I'll say is, which I think is unfortunate, and so the media is going to have to figure out how to do this, is they include some level of candidates, and they come up criteria to exclude other level of candidates. And there was discussions. Was discussions before Herman Cain had his rise, primarily hinged on his debate performances and people seeing him as debates, of him being excluded, from having been excluded from the debates, just like Gary Johnson was basically excluded, and Buddy Roemer was excluded. And that basically was just a random thing. I mean, for many reasons, they included Herman Cain in those debates early on and didn't include Gary Johnson and Buddy Roemer. But if Herman Cain had been excluded, he would have never had the opportunity.
Right. He wouldn't. He'd be like Buddy Roemer. He wouldn't exist in this race.
And to me, if Buddy Roemer had been included, I'm not advocating Buddy Roemer, but Buddy Roemer or Gary Johnson had been included, they could have easily performed well and been part of this.
If you had the folksy Buddy Roemer railing against Wall Street, that is a voice that could resonate with a fair amount of voters.
But the problem is that the media thinks we can't have 14 people on stage, we can't have 12 people on stage, we can't have 11, and they say, oh, we're going to exclude, we're going to cut this one, and we're going to cut this one. And I think that's a problem when basically most of how people are learning about the candidates, not through the candidates' activity, it's through the free media air.
Well, before we go to questions from the audience, and so what we have is microphones here and here. So those who have questions, this is just like the forum. So for all you're all alums or friends. So you have to get up, you have to introduce yourself, tell your affiliation. A question is a question, it's not a speech. It ends with a question mark and it is brief. And so while folks in the audience are thinking about coming up to ask us questions, I want to ask with very brief explanations, who's going to be the Republican nominee, and at the end I'll come back and ask who's going to win the general election, based upon what we know today. And I'll start with Elaine.
Romney.
I'll take the field against Romney.
Okay.
Romney.
Matthew basically has just chosen like 9 candidates.
Right.
A very bold prediction.
Yeah.
Oh, watch. Romney. Go ahead. Go. I don't think taking 9 candidates was not the bold one, buddy.
Mitt Romney.
Now, I would like to know, we had a panel discussion in April at the forum, and I made the panelists do something similar, and they actually all said Romney then. So it's interesting. We've campaigned for 6 or 7 months, and we're still there. Yes.
Hi, my name is Jason Palmer. I'm an education venture capitalist. My question goes back to something, Matt, you mentioned earlier in the conversation, that let's suppose we don't pick Romney, that it actually ends up being someone who's more of a conservative Republican, and Obama is still kind of unelectable because of unemployment, et cetera. Is there realistically a chance for a third party to come in and do something different this time, kind of Perot plus? I want to hear from all of you on that.
Perot sane.
How would that happen?
Not necessarily.
Yeah, that's true.
Not necessarily.
It's a great conversation in a vacuum, and I think we're at a time in America where it is a opportunity for it, because I think there's a great level of frustration in both political parties. The interesting thing about today was both political parties are basically at their lowest point. Each political party and how the American public sees them. Normally what happens in this country is one party rises, the other party falls, and if one party falls, the other party rises. And so there's this inverse relationship. Both parties are despised, basically, to a large degree. So if that happens, which I think is a likelihood of happening, I think there's going to be enthusiasm for somebody wealthy that can self-fund. The problem is once you start trying to come up with that name, and that's where you sort of run into a roadblock. I mean, if I could sit up here and say, if I could design it like sitting in a back room with a cigar, a couple of women.
Women with cigars?
Because, if they want. The perfect candidate in this environment to run against Barack Obama, and let's say it's Rick Perry or somebody like that, would be a female candidate who is fiscally conservative, socially progressive, has some business background, has an ability to sort of is good on television and can convey themselves. So I say that, like, this would be perfect. Man, I'm lined up, I'm get behind this one, I'll do whatever it takes for this one. I think this would be a winning deal. And then you go, okay, now who is that? Who is that? And so that's the problem. I think a third party is going to run. But I think what is likely to happen, the third party is going to run, and then Barack Obama is going to get 41% of the vote. This is what I think is going to get 41% of the vote and win re-election. I think that is if a third party runs, unless it's some candidate like we don't know and then emerges in some, will help re-elect Barack Obama, is what I think.
Anybody else disagree or want to add something?
Matthew's dreaming of a candidate that has the economic credibility of Warren Buffett, the national security credibility of Colin Powell, half as much money as Mike Bloomberg, and half as crazy as Ross Perot. That would be that person would win in a landslide. Now if we could just find that guy or gal.
Gal.
Yeah,
It ain't going to happen.
Yeah.
One can dream.
Yeah, we can, and it'll be fun. It'll be fun to cover, but the bar is so high, and once a third party candidate gets in, then the other two parties start eating them and destroying them and screaming that they're spoilers, and so they end up with 11% of the vote or something, and it just doesn't. We're just not ready. So I think someone would have had to lay the groundwork.
Yeah.
I agree. By now, I don't think there could be a spontaneous combustion.
On November 7th in the forum, and we're going to stream live on the internet, we are going to have a discussion about this topic and Americans Elect, which is a group that's trying to get ballot access in all 50 states, whose executive director is a HKS alum. But we're going to talk about this and explore it with them, but with a broader perspective. Over here.
Good evening. My name is Alexei Nazem. I was in the business school. Thank you for the very lively discussion. It's been fascinating. My question is a little bit more general, which is, based on a lot of the things that you guys have been talking about, I wonder to myself, as I've wondered for a long time, if the primary process is really the best way to select our presidential candidates. It seems inefficient. It seems ineffective. It's kind of strange that, you know, a few vocal people in Iowa and New Hampshire have a disproportionate say in who become our presidential candidates. And based on the nature of your conversation, precious little of it has to do with the issues. It's who flubbed the question in the last 2 minutes of a debate, you know, who had the more money. So, you know, A, generally, you know, is this a broken system that needs to be changed? And B, will the 2012 election actually be won on the issues, which it really should be, because we're in a terrible spot right now in America, or is it going to be based on a lot of this inside baseball?
I'll let Elaine take the process part. She's one of the foremost experts on that.
Yeah, I did write a book on this topic. And,
is it still available on Amazon?
And it's still available on Amazon. In the good old days, okay, when we nominated Franklin Roosevelt, Dwight D. Eisenhower, et cetera, we nominated our presidential candidates in conventions. We had very few primaries, and the primaries we had were not binding. So a lot of major candidates never even bothered to run in the primaries. That system lost credibility in the years between 1968 and 1972, and there started to be a reform, which was caused for some good reasons. It had a lot to do with the anti-war movement within the Democratic Party. And so we've now, in 60, 70 years in American history, we have gone from essentially a closed process, which was closed to the leadership of the major parties, to a completely open process, where anybody just decides, oh, I'm going to run for president, and they pay their, I think it's $2,000 to get on the New Hampshire ballot. They pay their $2,000, they get on the ballot, that's it, okay? So we are beginning to hear some people wondering, what is this process, right? What have we wrought with this process? The process is also a little weird because it is sequential. No other piece of the American political system unfolds in a sequence. We have elections on one day. Everybody votes on one day. In the presidential nominating system, we start in January and we meander through June. And theoretically, by the way, those conventions that happen at the end of August, they could overturn everything that happened in those primaries, okay? Because these delegates, in fact, have the ultimate legal authority. So we have gone from a closed system to a completely open system. Now, what was fascinating to me in 2008 was how suddenly the notion of superdelegates became completely illegitimate. Oh, people thought it was terrible. Young people especially thought it was terrible. And I had to keep reminding people, it was superdelegates nominated Franklin Roosevelt. Superdelegates nominated Dwight D. Eisenhower. That's what we used to do. And so the question now, and I think Trey alluded to this, the question that New Hampshire is bringing up with the threat to go in December, et cetera, is will this primary process fall apart of its own idiocy? It sort of grew organically. Will it then fall apart? If it falls apart, one of two things happen. Either the parties go back to essentially a closed system, and there's a lot of fear that somehow that would be illegitimate, or Congress does something that it has never been very interested in doing, which is it steps in and it creates a national primary, where everybody in America votes on one day for their candidate. Now, we've never, like, members of Congress have never shown much interest. There's been lots of bills. They've never shown much interest. So a precursor to that would have to be some kind of disintegration of the process, where everybody, press, media, citizens, they're just like throwing up their hands and say we're sick of it. We're not there yet, but And so for the time being, we're left with an evolutionary process. The bottom line to understanding this process is no one is in charge. Okay, there is no one who can decide this. 50 state legislatures, 50 state Democratic parties, 50 Republican, state Republican Democratic parties, they've all got their own ideas about this thing. 2 national parties and a Congress. It's kind of a mess.
But just to point out, though, the 2 things about the 2 ideas that Elaine has, that about what might happen, right? If this system were to be replaced, you know, there is now in our culture, whether we like it or not, a deep suspicion of the notion of the smoke-filled room, and a bunch of unaccountable people making these decisions. And you know, we can say that's how it got done in the past, and they produced some great presidents. It's true. But in a society that's wired the way this society is, that has social networking, that has the internet, that has the communications means we have a more decentralized, more atomized, more individualized society. People are not going back to the smoke-filled room. That's number one. Right. And number 2, a national primary would be a nightmare. And it would be a nightmare for precisely one reason. Once you have a national primary, the price for admission is you got to raise $300, $400 million to run in that race. The reason that we have this system that we have in these small states that everybody decries because they're not like the rest of America, which is true, is that it opens the door to people with not very much money being able to go and compete on a level playing field, because you can't spend more than $10 or $15 million in Iowa. You can't spend more than $15 or $20 million in New Hampshire. But that's why we don't have California first, because we, at least ostensibly, we want candidates to be able to compete who can raise money but don't have to raise a huge amount of money. A national primary, you'd have the only people who could run would be people who could raise, and actually in the current race we're talking about, you'd have to be able to raise $1 billion to even be a competitive candidate. And I think it's fair to say, certainly in the Democratic Party, and I think in the Republican Party too, no one would swallow that. No one wants that. People think that would be problematic for all the obvious reasons. So we have a system that is totally screwy, and yet, like Winston Churchill on democracy, it's not clear there's a better system than the one we have.
I look at this slightly differently. I don't think the process is the problem, and I don't think the system is the problem. I think what's changed and caused the dysfunction that we're in today is a much broader problem. I believe we are on the verge of having a broken democracy. And if anybody studies history and history of the worlds and why democracies form in certain places and don't form in others, the main reason why they form in some places, why they formed here and other places in the history of the world and they haven't formed in other places, is hinged on one thing. And it's the ability for the one place can come together in a common sense of interest in a common way and solve problems. And the other place is tribally based society where they can't come together, they refuse to come together, they fight, they have there's no way they have shared sacrifice, they won't come together. America today is closer to a tribal society than it is to a society. I mean, if we think the primary and caucus problem is a problem, so is Congress. I mean, so is our branches of government. And to me, these are all just reflections, and what's dysfunction is however this has happened and however people live, how they now live as tribes, they now watch stuff that only confirms what they agree with. You know, conservatives watch Fox, liberals listen to NPR and watch MSNBC. Everybody isolates themselves. The middle feels lost. And so we have become a tribal society where it is difficult to have a functioning democracy. That's what I think.
Thank you. I'm Charles Kimball. I was an undergraduate decades ago. Most of the time since then I worked on Wall Street. And I wanted to dig deeper into the third-party issue. In particular, one of the candidates on the Republican side who has had nothing said about him, John Huntsman, seems to be sort of lining up by not taking pledges to do that. I'm wondering your thoughts about him. Second, I would like to explore what you said you're going to look at another forum, which is Americans Elect. If people could talk about that, I'd kind of be interested. And then the third one is Occupy Wall Street. What kind of impact would that have?
We've got about 2 minutes left, so I challenge you to give brilliant, concise, brilliant, concise answers. Lois, yeah.
I don't think John Huntsman is going anywhere. I think that some of us disagree on this. I think he might be positioned for maybe 2000 and...
he moved.
Oh, I'm sorry, he moved. Okay, I was like, where am I looking? He might be positioned for
4 years
I
from
thought
now.
John Huntsman was here.
But he's not, we were talking about this earlier, he hasn't set off a spark, he hasn't carried an issue, he hasn't distinguished himself in any real way to kind of step up, and I think he would sink like a stone. I still do think there might be room in our democracy for a third-party candidate, but I'm not sure we're ready for it yet. I'll let somebody else do the second part of your question.
I got to do the Americans elect. The Americans elect, I mean, I think they're going to provide ballot access and do a lot of infrastructure. The complete theory of it, falls apart until you have the person in there. It's like saying, I really want to get married, I really want to get married, I really want to get married, but I can't find anybody. But I'm all ready to get married, I'm all ready to get married, I'm all ready to get married. Who are you going to marry? I don't know, I can't find them. And so, like, the Americans elect has set up a nice institution, but until you have the player that's going to be able to bring the country together or bring it 40% of the country together, that's where the missing piece of the equation is. And so God bless Americans elect, because anything that'll help ballot access and do all that kind of stuff and provide an option for somebody to run. But until you identify who that person is, and as I said, I think it should be a woman, but find her. Until you do that, you're left with the institution of marriage and no spouse.
Why can't they do it like America's Got Talent? Just like hold open auditions.
Dancing with the Stars.
Well, before we get to Occupy Wall Street, I do want to, for those in the audience who aren't that familiar with Americans Elect, let me explain concisely what it is. They're going to get ballot access in all 50 states. They've got enough money and enough lawyers to do that. And the idea is, in the summer, next summer, there's going to be an online convention that anybody can be a delegate, and you can vote for a presidential and a vice presidential candidates, and the candidates have to come from opposite parties. And it's got some pretty big names. Mark McKenna is helping them get organized, and they've got money. And so that's Americans Elect. Tom Friedman wrote a column about it. Google it, find out more about it, or tune in on November 7th. Okay, Occupy Wall Street. Let's talk about, because we could have another forum discussion on that. Let's talk about it in the context of the presidential race. Will it have any kind of impact on the race?
I think it is evidence of the fact that the young generation, which is the Obama base, is still very much engaged and very much interested in politics. And I think they're going to be there for them. I think they're going to turn out for them. I mean, I think they've got some complaints with them, which are probably justified. But all I see there is the energy. And I was a little worried because all I was seeing was the energy on the right with the Tea Party movement. Mm-hmm. And I think this is kind of a counterbalance, and it means we've got a real race ahead of us.
I think the Republicans made a huge mistake. They should have adopted it. They should have not necessarily adopted what was like the people that were in there. But they should have stood up and said, you're dang right. Wall Street has messed this whole thing up. Main Street's a thing. Republicans still think Main Street's part of their base. Wall Street's part of their base. Wall Street isn't the Republican base. The base of the Republican Party is out in small towns and in rural places and in people that, watch NASCAR. That's the base of the Republican Party in this country. And do you think those people are happy with Wall Street? I mean, they may not. So if a Republican, Michelle Bachmann could have done this. She whiffed on it when she was asked the question at the debate, and she sort of went into her sort of anti-Obama thing. I don't understand why a Republican hasn't stand up and said, yeah, we need to frog march and handcuff and put a bunch of guys on Wall Street in orange jumpsuits and march them down to jail, because look what they've done to this country. I don't understand why they haven't done it.
I will say that if Barack Obama, who I have always regarded as an extraordinarily gifted political performer, if Barack Obama can co-opt Occupy Wall Street, given Barack Obama's record on this issue, and the amount of money he's collecting from Wall Street, if he can co-opt Occupy Wall Street to his advantage, he is 10 times the political performer that I ever thought he was before. Because there is no conceivable, substantive, or principled basis on which he should be able to do that.
I think the one thing that the protests have done is put a spotlight on the concentration of wealth. Yeah. And I think that's a Democratic issue. And if the Democrats can get their act together and focus on that, and they did a very good job of embracing it. I mean, I think that was smart. But if they can continue to embrace the movement and continue to appeal to small-town America, I think it could affect congressional elections.
The down-ballot races.
Yeah, I'm not sure about the presidential, but I think it could affect down-ballot elections.
Yeah, interesting point. Yes, and quick and concise and brilliant.
Oh.
I'm Beth Noble. I'm a professor at Fordham. I'd like to know how you think the influence of the Tea Party is going to specifically manifest itself in the Republican primaries.
Well, you're already,
Yeah,
how it's going to, you're already seeing it. I mean, the inability for the Republican Party to organize itself and get behind the best possible candidate is evidence that the Tea Party has a huge weight in this. The inability for anybody to sort of say, I'm the leader of the Tea Party and this is the way we're going, is evidence of their ability to sort of, and it really is. There's this great book, there's this great book, The Starfish and the Spider, and it's about organizations, diffuse organizations versus leader-led and hierarchical organizations, and basically we're now at a time where you need to have a diffuse organization that's successful as opposed to hierarchical and leader-led. It's like the difference between the Catholic Church, which is hierarchical, which are having difficult issues, and then various mega churches that are around. The Tea Party has been successful because they are a movement but without somebody that somebody can attack on a daily basis, and I think that's provided success. But why we're in this fluid process and why we have the candidates we have and why we don't have certain mainstream candidates is a direct result of the influence of the Tea Party.
Okay. All right. Yes.
Yes, my name is Ron Barenbaum. I teach at NYU and I write on business ethics issues. There are two words one never hears mentioned, didn't hear them tonight. They are foreign and policy. I was going to say there were four, national and security, but that was mentioned in passing with respect to a non-candidate. What influence, if any, do you think these kinds of issues will have on the Republican nominating process and on the presidential race?
I'll just say historically, foreign policy has no impact when the country is in a recession. It just doesn't. Foreign policy impacts races when there's a war and when you're having a lot of casualties, not when you're winding down a war. And foreign policy is just simply, in more elections than I care to think about, it just isn't an issue. Now, that being said, there is a way that foreign policy always plays into presidential politics, which is the people aspiring to be president have to be able to convey that they're up to the job. So that's why, if you remember when Bush was running in 2000, there was a great big deal made about the fact that he didn't know the names of countries, the names of prime ministers.
No, it was general. Who was the?
Who was the general?
Who was the Pakistani? Oh, the general guy.
Oh, the general guy, Musharraf. Musharraf. Right. We don't know either. But we're not.
No,
running
I was
for
just saying what his answer was. It was the general guy.
The general guy. Yeah.
You got the title right.
You got the title right.
You know what to call him, my general.
But the fact of the matter is that foreign policy, mostly in presidential elections, primaries and generals, is about. It's sort of the test of, okay, is this guy up to the job? And other than that, most Americans don't actually have strong opinions on foreign policy issues. Or frankly, if they have opinions, they're what the pollsters call non-attitudes. In other words, they just make up an answer to have the pollster think that they're smart, but they don't really care about it. So unless you are in the middle of the Vietnam War, right, or you've just been attacked in 9/11, this is
or
not...
Or a war's going badly like Iraq.
Or a
like
war's going badly like Iraq in 04, where...
Or 08.
And 08,
or particularly by 08. It's just not an issue, never has been. And boy, oh boy, this time Obama has some really big foreign policy advantages.
And
right?
he could be running against someone who refers to Uzbekistan as who's Becky, Stan.
That's right. Yes, exactly.
But I think to Lois's last point, and to John Scott, that the Herman Cain's Achilles heel is precisely this point, and to a lesser extent Rick Perry, because he bombed the 3 a.m. question.
That's right.
Yes.
Hi, my name is Stephen Dewey. I'm a graduate of the college. And I'm just wondering, a lot of you guys talked about sort of this growing gulf between the people and their elected representatives. You mentioned a failed democracy. And I feel like a lot of that has to do with people feeling like they don't really have a say, like they can't really guide the politics. They feel like kind of political practitioners have figured out how to kind of push their buttons to get them to think one way or the other rather than them sort of deciding it themselves. And if you look at like the Tea Party, the Occupy Wall Street, I feel like it's kind of people saying that they kind of want policy to originate with them and then sort of filter up to their politicians rather than the other way around. So my question is for you, is there a way to create like democratic institutions that are a little more responsive rather than just being sort of a turnover every 2 years or whatever, whether it's like using petitions or using polling maybe in a more sophisticated way, so people feel like there's like a more immediate response to what they're thinking in our democracy?
Well, I'll just say one thing is...
Yeah, you're the one who said democracy's broken.
Yeah, the ability of practitioners to exercise, their influence is drastically lower than it used to be. Drastically lower than it used to be. That, you know, the media advertising parts of the campaign have much less ability to do what they traditionally did before. With the internet, ability of people to communicate, all of those sorts of things, the strength of the grassroots is at a modern high. That technology and all that is at a modern high. Simultaneously, we have institutions that do not allow for change. And so, I mean, your question centers on a really key thing and we could have a huge philosophical debate about this or a conversation about this, is do our institutions need to fail and do we need to begin with something else? And I think that's a very valid question. A very valid question, because there's a huge group of people out there that have the ability to exercise influence with the technology and all that, but the institutions are unresponsive to that. And can you work within the system and change that? I have my doubts. I actually think that we are at a time when maybe some of the institutions need to start failing and new ones need to get built.
This is probably going to have to be our last question. Yes.
Hi, I'm Marva York. I've spent the last 15 years on Wall Street at Smith Barney, Merrill Lynch, and for the last 3 weeks, MetLife Securities. Matt said he doesn't understand why some of the titans of Wall Street weren't marched in orange jumpsuits and put under the jailhouse, and I'm probably agreeing with you. And I'm wondering, and maybe it says something about the American populace and maybe electorate, how people have such unrealistic expectations that one person could have turned this around inside of 3 years. And I think the real unfortunate thing is that they may vote on that.
Well, the reason why they have unrealistic expectations is because the politicians tell them exactly that.
Yeah.
I mean, they don't get up there and say, there's not really much I can do, and I'm just one person, and your life may be better, but it's going to take a long time. And
well, and just to support that, I mean, most people think that if Obama loses, okay, which I don't really think he will, but if he loses, the history will unwind his administration as follows. They will look at the spring of 2009, and they will say they did not understand the depth of this recession, because had he understood it, he would never have gone to health care, spent his considerable political capital on an issue that at that point in time was secondary or tertiary to the concerns of the American public. So I think that, you know, if you unwind it, that'll be where it was. He thought he had the issue solved. Larry Summers, our colleague, told him that unemployment would be at 8%. Okay? They thought they'd locked it. They moved on to other thing. They were anxious to spend the political capital. It was a very costly mistake. A very costly mistake. But it was made because they believe these guys, you know, who become president, they get onto Air Force One, they've got, you know, you ride on Air Force One and there's an entire army with you all the time. You look out the window if you're doing a trip overseas and there's 2 fighter jets flying on each side of you for protection. It's a pretty heady experience. And guess what? Just as Matt says, they actually believe that they can fix these unfixable problems. They tell us we can fix these unfixable problems. And then when they don't, we're always mad at them.
But I totally agree with that, and I think it just to put it. But it is amazing. It is amazing. You know, there were economists. You know, Ken Rogoff, other people went to them and said, you know, this recession is going to be really deep and really hard. Don't raise expectations. Talk it down. It's going to take a long time. Don't go out and say that the unemployment rate is going to fall down. Even if you think it might be below 8%, don't say that. In the summer of 2010, they called the summer Recovery Summer.
I know they did.
That wasn't the spring of 2009. They stood up and declared that the summer of 2010 was when the recovery was going to happen.
You know,
What were they smoking?
We had a mission.
It was are those peanut M&Ms on Air Force One filled with hashish? What is the story?
It was their version of mission accomplished.
Honest to
Yeah,
God.
it really was.
You had, there's just, anyway.
Well, I apologize to the two gentlemen who are standing. We're out of time for questions in the audience, and I want to, as I said, I wanted to bring it back to the conclusion of ultimately on November, whatever the date of the election is. You said you thought the president was going to win. Why don't you just, we gave one-word answers for the primary. Why don't you give a little bit more explanation, but be concise and brilliant?
I think that Obama, for all of his trouble, and all of his troubles right now, which are considerable, I think in the end he will win, and he'll win because there's a steadiness and a security about him that people still like. And he's still got that, and I think in the end he'll pull it off.
Matthew?
I honestly don't know. I mean, that's the truthful answer. I have no idea. There's so many factors going against him. There is the factor that only one Democrat who sought re-election in the last 120 years lost, and that was Jimmy Carter. He's the only Democrat in the last 120 years who sought re-election lost. So he's got all those factors. I think there's an idea that a third party could help him, but we are in such, I think, uncharted territory on a lot of this kind of stuff, and what's going to surface and who the Republicans are going to nominate. I have no idea.
Well, I think Obama's going to eke it out because despite his national numbers going down, you know, these races are fought state by state. They've already proven, you know, that they can put a good ground operation, and they do, you know, a spectacular job with social media. And as Elaine said, if it's 24% of the young people. So I feel like, you know, barring something worse happening, I think that he might be able to eke it out.
John, the last word.
Wow. 40% approval rating. 75% of the country say the country's on the wrong track. That's like the end of the Bush administration. You know, bad. Those are bad. That's bad numbers. An unemployment rate over 9% that no one in the economics profession that I can find thinks is going to be any substantially, even slightly, not substantially, even slightly, conceivably, could be higher. A lot of people, half the economics profession thinks we're going to have a double-dip recession, and then the number could be over 10% next November. You know, to win that race, you know, will require an extraordinary feat of both political performance and machination and luck. I wouldn't say he can't win, but it will require him doing the thing that George W. Bush did in 2004, but doing it to a greater degree, which is doing this thing that turning what normally, when an incumbent president runs, the vote is a referendum on his performance. If that is what it is for Barack Obama, he will lose. And he'll lose unless he's running against a wildly inappropriate Republican candidate, which is, of course, possible. But if he's running against Mitt Romney and it's a referendum on his performance, he will lose. If he can turn the race into a choice election, as George W. Bush, Matthew knows very well, did, and we all do in 2004, and succeed in rendering the Republican nominee, whoever that is, unacceptable to the country, he can win. There's a lot of reasons to think he can't win, that he won't win. The argument that Mitt Romney will make is the argument that the White House is most afraid of. It is the argument that, not an argument about Barack Obama's a liberal, Barack Obama's a communist, he's a socialist, he's a Muslim, he's any of those things. This is what Mitt Romney will say as the nominee. He will say, Barack Obama is a good man. He has enormous integrity, he's very intelligent. He did not cause this recession.
He's got a nice family.
He's got a great family. Love his wife, love everything about him. He's a fantastic man and a good American. He did not cause this recession. He was handed a horrible situation by my own party. We were responsible for a lot of things that went wrong. He's not to blame for this happening. But he's tried a lot of stuff in the last 4 years. And he's spent a lot of money. And we're no better off than we were 4 years ago. And it's insane to keep doing the same thing over and over again. We need to try something different. We need to give them a gold watch and say, thank you for trying so hard. You tried a lot of stuff in a very bad situation, but the stuff you're trying isn't working, and you don't seem to really understand the economy. You're kind of out of your depth. We got to try something else. That argument is going to appeal to a lot of Americans in the fall of 2012, and yet, as Lois said at the beginning of this session, the Obama campaign is going to run $700 million in negative ads against whoever they run against. No one in this room has ever seen anything like that. We have no idea what the effect on the national psyche is going to be. There are going to be a lot of Democrats who thought Barack Obama was special and above politics as it's normally practiced. You're going to have any of those illusions that you still have in your head, you're going to be disabused of. They're going to run the most negative campaign ever in the history of presidential politics. Can that campaign win? I suppose, but it's going to be an uphill fight for him.
Well, thank you, all four of you, for these great insights. Thanks to the audience. I hope for the Harvard alums in the audience who've had a chance to be in the John F. Kennedy Jr. Forum in person, where we have discussions like this a couple of nights a week, that this is brings back fond memories. And I want to tell you that over the next month and a half, we're going to roll out a brand new website that allows all of you to watch, which with much better technology than we currently possess on our website, these kinds of discussions on your laptops, on your iPads, on your iPhones, or on your desktops, or on your Apple TV or whatever. So tune into that. We're very proud of that, and it's going to come out in the next month and a half. And we want to invite all of you to stick around. We've got a bar over here, and I think there's one over there as well. So let's continue the conversation. Let's reacquaint with each one of another, a lot of old friends here, and let's make some new friends. Thanks, and have a great night.